All right, if you got your Bibles, turn to Daniel chapter 3. So we can go through, I know we preached on the Hebrew children and the fire furnace a lot. Let's see if we can go through it and just break some stuff down, take a little bit slower. Daniel chapter 3. Alright, start with verse 1. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. And he set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, and the judges, and the treasurers, and the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together under the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth it shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So let's stop right here just a second. Now this idol that Nebuchadnezzar had made was not of any particular god. It was just an idol that he made to be worshipped. And from the things that I could find, that he just made it in an image of himself. Because he didn't want any other god to be worshipped. He wanted to set it up to be worshipped as himself. And the things that I can find too, that it is not completely solid gold, but more than likely would have been made out of wood and then plated with gold. But that being said, with all this stuff being commanded about the music and having to bow down before it and worship it, how do you think that the people, when they heard this, what do you think their response was? Nobody got any thoughts? See, everybody's studying that one. What do you think went through some of the minds of these people that were standing there and got told they had to obey this thing?
Oh, fear.
Fear?
Some of them. Exactly.
Right? Anybody else? I think confusion. Some sort of confusion. What you think, Frank? I see some wheels turning over there. So fear, confusion. Anybody else?
How many gods worship more than one God in Mountain?
Worship several gods.
So this was just another God added to what they already worship.
That's right. So this is just another god added to the however many list long
That the king had set up. And they feared the word of the king because they knew, or all the people of that place knew. See, he didn't call the whole nation together, he called the rulers of the nation together. All the sheriffs, all of them that had authority, that he had set up in authority, he just called them together, what I'm reading.
That's right. So basically, this was set up as more just to keep people under his thumb, keep people under his rule.
And they just added this golden image to the gods that they worship.
Because, like I said, from the reading that I could find when studying some of this stuff out earlier today, is that he didn't set it up just to necessarily be a god to worship, but more like an image of himself, so that they were worshiping an idol, but at the same time they were worshiping him. Does that make sense?
In a way, he was trying to make himself the authority.
Trying to make himself out to be a god.
Show them that he was the one. Pretty much what he was trying to show.
That's right. Anybody else? All right. Pick up verse 7. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, and shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. So now, let's stop right here for a second. Now, by listing all these types of musical instruments and things like this was no just small gathering of people playing music. This was something pretty big. Just put it together more like if you'd liken it almost into an orchestra. This was something big. And so now these Chaldeans had come after they played the first time, and of course we know who didn't bow down. But why do you think they tried to sweeten this up a bit by just saying, "O king, live forever"?
You can do what they want.
You can do what they wanted. Anybody else?
See, that was already jealousy in the ranks of the authority. Because he had said he'd already set the Jew boys up as in an authority state.
That's right.
And probably maybe even have took down some of his own people in the process, put them out, put the Jews in, because he liked their thing, the way they handle things. So it made some of them jealous.
So it could almost make you wonder if some of these that approached were not the ones that got replaced. It almost make you wonder that.
See, that was a whole different nation coming in on. The king had set up.
That's right.
And I can imagine in my own mind, the scripture don't bear this out, I can imagine my own mind that they thought, why is he favoring them over us, his own people? What makes him so special? You know, this maybe sort of that kind of talk and jealousy like that. That's true. That is very true. But they didn't know the God that he was. That's right.
All right. So now we find out it's the three that we knew it would be. So there are start with verse 12. So there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Now, up until this point where it says they serve not thy gods, there was no issue. Right? From what I'm gathering here up until this point, until he made this decree that they had to serve the golden image. Anybody else got to gather that too? But there were no problems up until they said, hey, we got to worship this golden image.
They never served a God before.
Right.
Served others.
But now they make it known that, hey, they didn't serve your other gods either. Kind of putting icing on the cake. All right. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, if you be ready at that time, at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? So, in verse 14, and some things I had read up on as well, Nebuchadnezzar, anytime that there was a conflict, he didn't just jump to conclusion. He went directly to the source and asked, hey, what's the issue? He didn't go by hearsay. So he went directly to the source and asked these three men, said, what's the problem? So now, this is where their great faith was not only put to the test here, but later on, but this was one of the starts of it. Because now they have to face the king directly and say, no, we didn't worship your God. We didn't worship your idol. So what do you think that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thought when they said, hey, the king wants to talk to you right now? What do you think were some thoughts that was going through their minds?
Well, my take on that was before they even went into captivity, they already made their mind that they weren't serving no other God. God of the Hebrews.
Right.
So it wasn't an issue for them. It was an issue for the Babylonians. But it wasn't an issue for the captivity. These kids, the men, right?
Right.
They were set, and their minds were made. By the answer they give them when they talk to you. But you got to go back to chapter 1 to find out the whole ordeal about some of this stuff. So he had set Daniel and the three Hebrew children up already.
Right.
And the king appointed them a portion of daily meat of his meat.
Right.
Okay? But Daniel and the three Hebrew children didn't eat because it was tried to rearrange the Word of God, tried to change it to suit their convenience,
Right.
for what they think's right. See, but the three Hebrew children didn't do that. They stood for what on their God. They trusted in Him. They didn't try to arrange it. They didn't say, and they just had their minds made up. They said, whatever you do to us, we're not bad.
Now see, let me flip this around now. What do you think the king thought? Seeing it's like you had said now, he looked upon these men and they were better than anybody that he had. So you would almost have to think he would have a whole lot of respect for these guys. Because they gave good answers to anything that he asked. They also, anything that he sent them over, they took care of it. There was no problem. So what do you think his first initial thoughts were when they said, hey, these three men right here, they're not bound?
What his thoughts was.
What the king's thoughts were.
Could it have been that he, was there more at work here than just the king? Makes me wonder if that was a force of evil, from the enemy.
I think there was jealousy.
Yeah, to make them, to see if they would understand.
I think there was you can see a hint of jealousy there from these other guys that's coming and telling on them. Because you got to read the second chapter, which you didn't get into there, where Daniel actually found favor with the king. And so the king said, what would you have me to do? And Daniel suggested him to put Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over this providence. He said, it was Daniel's suggestion, and he loved Daniel. He loved the ways of Daniel. He was just fascinated by his abilities. So he says, okay, this worked out good before. I'll take your word. We're going to go ahead and put them over. So I think when they found favor with that king like that through Daniel, and you'll find out Daniel was the primary one here over this, the other, not downgrading the other three at all, but I can see where the king had a lot of favor in Daniel, and he just took Daniel at his word and said, that's a good idea. I'll go ahead and do this, because you see things that are in secret. You know things that nobody else could find out. Nobody else knows. You're a very smart, wise guy. So I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to put these guys where you tell me to. So once he did that, the king probably thought, well, what happened? I promoted them. I gave them some of the highest ranking jobs, and now they're not wanting to do it. But the ones that came to him were probably jealous of that.
You think he felt betrayed to an extent?
Probably.
Because
he had found favor with Daniel, and Daniel promoted, yeah.
And then they didn't do what he asked them to do.
I just raised you up. What are you doing to me? You're backstabbing me. What are you doing to me?
What you saying? I'm over, Linda. I see you got something over there.
No, I was just thinking he was angry because he felt betrayed.
I ain't never looked at it that way before, but it's the truth. It makes sense. It does. I trust somebody enough to put them over something, and then they don't do as you ask. It just makes you feel that way. So let me ask you this then. I know it says that in his rage and fury he commanded them to be brought to him. But now, do you think when he talked with them and asked them the questions, do you think that he was asking those in rage and fury, or do you think he was more asking those of, guys, what's going on? Why didn't you bow? You heard what I told you. Do you think it was more just to try to be a calm, cool, collective conversation, or do you think he just went all outright, rage and fury?
I think once they decided they weren't going to after the fact, it got worse, because then he made a decision to heat the furnace 7 times harder than it was supposed to be.
So it could have been just trying to have a conversation at first. It's like, hey, what's the issue? You heard what I said. All right. So then he makes the very pompous remark of who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Then it kind of comes to the realization. It comes to the realization of, no, we're not just serving this idol, we're serving Nebuchadnezzar. That's who they're worshiping. If you really read into it.
What do you think made Nebuchadnezzar backtrack? If you got to go to chapter 2 to see what I'm talking about. Because he makes the statement to Daniel that your God is the God of gods. And your Lord is the Lord of kings, or the over any king in the world. Because he acknowledged Daniel's God.
But he never professed him as his God.
But what would make him backtrack? You know, because he said, oh, Daniel, your God's it. You look like you'd want to worship that God if he was the God of gods. Then all of a sudden, oh, wait, I'm going to set myself up. I'm going to let them worship me. Maybe.
Right?
Because he had all his kingdom watching him. And they knew what he had said. And they were, saying, is he going to keep his word, or is he going to let these guys die with it? So he had to prove the point that he was in control.
See, that point that Chris brought up, whenever you asked how the king felt, for a little while, I almost said maybe he expected it. Because he did say, Daniel's God is the God in that second chapter. I almost said, well, did he expect it? Because, how else was they worshiping, Daniel's God before this law was set up?
Let me read this right here if you don't care. This is where I'm reading. This is where I'm catching it at right here, verse 47, chapter 2. It said, the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. He put him in a very high position here. And then Daniel requested the king. He said, if I'm a man in this authority, I request that you set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. He stayed close to the king's house and let these other guys have a job to do that was high ranking as well. Daniel didn't forget them, in other words. He was like, look, if I'm being exalted, you're going to bring these three guys with me because they've been with me this whole time. You're going to bless them like you're blessing me.
But at the same time now, reading that verse 2 that you read in 47, he never proclaimed it to be his God as well. He said, your God.
Well, he didn't, but if you have to really study into this Babylon and some of this stuff to realize that if they had many gods.
Right.
But the reason they had many gods is because every time they thought they had a real good God, they would find another one they thought that was stronger than the one they had. So then they would add another. And then they would think they found one that was stronger than that God, and they would add that God to the list of the other gods they had. That's why they had so many gods.
So he was just trying to put God in.
It's like he was adding the real God in with the ones that they already had.
Okay.
So essentially, the king put himself in that list.
Because he felt like he was in high authority and high power. And at this time, Babylon was one of the greatest nations of that area.
That's right.
Because they had overthrown and overtaken, and that's how the Jews ended up here in the first place. Because they'd been overthrown. God allowed them to be overthrown by Babylon and taken over because of their disobedience and rebelliousness. So yeah, he's got a big head. I took over this place. They had the God of gods, but yet we were able to take them over. We were able to get control of them, and now we've took them into captivity in Babylon.
Anybody else? All right. Good stuff. All right, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, Be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded they should heat the furnace 17 times more than it was wont to be heated, and commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. So let's stop right here right quick. So now, like what was said earlier, he's got this reputation to stand up to. He's got this reputation to uphold. So now they just said, hey, I don't care what you do. We're not going to bow. Period. In a nutshell. So now he's went from just trying to talk to them to just all out. He's angry. He's done with it. So let me ask this question. So he says that they heated the furnace 17 times more hot. There 17 times more than it was wont to be heated. So now, on my research that I've done today, the only type of furnace that would have been around in that era would have been like an industrial furnace for like doing metal work. And the hottest it was designed to go was 2,372 degrees. That was to do metal work. So now, knowing that, take that and multiply it by 7. Anybody good at math right quick?
Like 16,000.
16,604 degrees. Now, let's see how many of us remember something from our science class that we had back a long time ago. How hot is the surface of the sun?
20,000.
9,941 degrees. It was hotter than the surface of the sun.
Twice as
So that makes sense to why it says that even the men that went to throw them in there died.
Just from the heat of it.
Just from the immense heat as soon as they got close to it.
When they opened the door, it killed the ones that was throwing them in.
It killed them.
What kind of walls did they have in that furnace that withstood that kind of heat?
I don't know. But from what I could find, like I said, it was for metal work, and also they would use it for like firing like tile, the ceramic tile, things of that nature that they would paint, so it would seal it.
It might have to be something in the earth.
It would have to be.
Yeah, it had to be more like a hole with it instead of just
Almost, so it would kind of go against what the odds of what you would think.
It had to be.
So then 2,000 degrees melt metal. Go to 16,000 degrees. Yeah, ain't no metal wall.
It would have to be, they had to find something that's kind of hole or something that had
Yeah,
to put them in.
rock on it, it'll explode. How hot the lava?
Well, whatever it was, there would have had to been a way for them to get out, because the Bible said they came forth out of it. They would have had to walk out of it somehow. So there had to be a ramp, a dirt ramp, something was there that they were able to walk out of if it was a hole. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
So whatever it was.
It could have been something that was, like Freeman said, was dug into the ground, but
I think maybe something like a cave.
Right.
Or some sort.
That's what Jessica's saying. What was it, like a tunnel?
it could have been. It could have very well been something that they would have took whenever they needed the tree or melt, whatever, put it in there to come back out and then start the fire away from it.
And you also have to think too, Nebuchadnezzar was in a seat where he could look over into that thing. Somehow he could see what was going on inside of it. So he had to be a seat somewhere up high to look down in that furnace.
That's what I was thinking. He said he looked down.
Because it said he looked down into it. He was looking into the furnace when he saw what happened to him. Because he wanted to see them dead. He thought he was going to see them burnt to a cinder. You know, and he was looking to see their destruction. Make him look what I did, you know.
That's immediately what the thoughts would have been. What were we going to say, Sarah?
Lava is only 1,200 degrees Celsius.
1,200 degrees Celsius.
Yes,
So let me
that's right.
let's convert that over.
What is that? Fahrenheit?
That's what I'm going to convert it over to.
I don't know, it says parentheses 1,300 to 2,200 Fahrenheit, but I don't know.
Well, let's see.
That's still not even a touch of how hot that would have been.
No. 16,000 degrees.
I mean, how
I'm saying this lava, that's ground is what's able to contain it. So
Right.
it would have to be something in the ground in order to contain that kind of heat. That has to.
Yeah, until lava gets under pressure, and builds up pressure,
Then
the ground can sustain it at its normal temperature.
Yeah, but I was just talking about just heat itself, that ground.
It can hold the
sustain
heat,
it,
yeah.
It can hold it.
The ground has the capability of holding that kind of heat.
That's probably about the only thing to do it. I don't think metal could.
It would have to been in the ground at some sort.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't see any other way they could have built one that would withstand that kind of heat.
Right.
Rock gonna explode.
Metals would melt in it.
Any type of metal gonna count.
It'd have to be in the earth.
almost like even from maybe a colonial version of it.
You can almost think of it that way. So that kind of puts a new perspective on it when you think of it that way. That at that temperature, there is no telling actually physically how close you could get to it before someone would die. And you think about that. Cause I don't know about y'all, but being around hot dryers and steamers at work, you get pretty close to them, you're ready to move real quick.
And they're nowhere near
And
that
they're
hot.
nowhere near that temperature. They're only 300
300 to 400.
400 degrees.
Go stand in the shade on 100 ground, stand in the middle of the sun on 100 degree day. Shade just me. Quick.
I wonder what kind of fuel they had in that thing.
I was thinking the same thing.
Get that hot.
What were they fueling it with?
Yeah, what were they fueling that thing to make it get that hot?
If it was down in the ground, it could have been natural gas.
There, it could have been some of it.
That's
could
gas
have
don't
been
burn that hot to it.
Not the kind we know.
Well, whatever they had going on in it, they were able to intensify or increase the fuel because that's the only thing that would have made it 7 times hotter.
And what it would say,
They would have had to fuel it with something to make it hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter.
They
Yeah,
had to have some way of measuring how hot it was, you would think. Because they were given a very specific number, maybe it was 7 times hotter than it was ever.
Well, that's what he commanded them to do. He said 7 times, make it 7 times hotter. In other words, get it just as hot as you can get it.
So even if he didn't get it to 16,000, still
It's still hot.
hot.
They would have just about melted the flesh off the bones being that hot. And melt the bones too, you think.
they did kill them.
The ones that, when as soon as they opened it, I could see it in my mind, and my big imagination goes, but I can see it in my mind that they've got a mechanism somehow where they've got maybe some guys a way off. They can open the door on that thing so they can throw them in. These big guys are standing in front of that door. And as soon as they open it and they thrust them toward the door, they're dead. And the other 3 fall into it.
And you think about
I mean,
it,
just as soon as the door is open, they're dead.
and you think about it too, anytime I don't know if any has ever watched somebody who's using a kiln or something like that, anytime they open that up, what immediately happens? The flame starts
Shoots it out.
So if they're standing anywhere near this, like you said, as soon as they thrust them in there, the flames come right back on them.
And they know they got to do it quick because they know it's hot. But it slew them that were throwing them in.
You could almost say it would have to incinerate them just instantly at that temperature.
It'd be almost like cremating.
They kind of like an atomic bomb.
Whoosh! When the door come open, boom. That's it. They had enough to throw them in before they fell dead. So they gave them, evidently they thrust them as soon as the door opened, then it killed them in the process.
Alright? So we're talking about almost being like cremation. How high do you think a furnace in a crematorium is?
Not even sure. I've read it, but I don't remember.
not that much.
The highest it says,
Probably 1,200.
the highest it says it is 1,800 degrees.
Okay.
So even before they heated it up, it was already hotter than
Crematory.
a crematory would be at 2,372 degrees before they heated it up. So, like I said, you would almost think as soon as they opened the doors, they were toast. All right. So we talked a lot about this. All right, let's pick back up at verse 21. So then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, and the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast three men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. So now, how do you think he got the image of knowing when he looked down at that furnace and seen 4 men walking around and said, that one is the Son of God? What do you think revealed that to him? Eyes were open.
That's a good way to put it. I didn't think about that.
Very good way of cutting dry pudding.
Burnt scales.
Something burnt something off.
I don't think anything that he had, whenever he knew it was burnt. Any of those great images, they were worship, they would have been burned up, but it had to be something above and beyond.
How in the world if the men got, I mean, if it's like the men that threw them in there, then how did he not get hurt trying to look up there in it to see if they were okay?
He would have had to been high enough above it so the heat wouldn't reach where he was. Because he's the king, he's sitting in a high place anyway.
High place.
He's above the rest. And he's probably up high enough where he can look over in it.
And even then, you think it's got to be hot even there too.
You know he could probably feel some heat.
He was already asking him, who is this God that can deliver you out of my hand?
Yep.
So when he seen him walking around, he said, that's their
He
God.
knew that was
That's their God.
He knew that was their God. That's what I was
I like the way you put that. That's their God.
That's their
That's
God.
not my gods. That's their God in there with them.
Physically, he knew that when they hit that fire, even got close to that furnace, by all means, they should have been scorched.
They should have died before they ever hit the bottom of it.
That's right.
And when he seen them
When they opened the door.
walking around, they went out and burned something around.
But it didn't take him but just a second. As soon as they threw him in, he said, whoa, hold it. What is that? What's going on down there?
He's seen his
Because
men
that
immediately
instantly they were made loose and they were walking around that quick. Because it burnt the ropes off them. But I had to.
You think about it, it said when they walked out, none of their clothes were singed, their hair on their head, nothing.
Nothing.
But they weren't bound.
The ropes were gone.
The ropes were
But
gone.
their coats, their hose, and all that stuff was still intact. Not even our hair was singed. I preached this one time, and the Lord showed me, and I preached it, that whenever we go through the fire, God will burn things off of us. And if we'll trust Him, He can loose us while we're in that fire.
That's right.
Loose us from all the things that's got us bound before we get in.
That's a good way of looking at it. And you got to think of it this way too. That gives us no excuse when the fire starts getting hot to lay down. Or say, God, take me out of this, turn it down.
What about the scripture that said the righteous man fall up to 7 times? The Bible said they fell into the furnace. But as soon as he looked, they were already on their feet walking around.
They didn't let their situation keep them back.
They jumped right back up.
You standing face to face with the problem, it's harder then to stand up for that thing that you talked about before, when you're face to face with it.
So that's what they're at.
Not many people stand in that situation, but they did.
All right. 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God. Boy, that tone changed real quick.
Changed him real fast.
Come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors being gathered together saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their heads singed, neither their coats changed, nor the smell of the fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, that every people, nation, and language would speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So his story changed real quick. But he's thinking in his heart that he took this as his own God. You think he accepted God as his God.
I put up there in the 29th verse. He recognized of the God of three men does not mean that he converted to their religion. It was simply an acknowledgement of their God's power.
So still, even after all this, and watching these men be delivered out of this furnace, he still wasn't recognizing as his God. So why do you think that is, that he still, even after witnessing this, that he still would not recognize God as his God? Man, I don't know about you, but if I had witnessed this, I don't care what I had been serving. I think I would have threw that down real quick. You think you may have still had some pride? What you think, Raymond? What do you think, England? So even after all this, he still wouldn't accept God. He still just kind of put him in the list with all the others.
what is boasting in chapter 4, according to Worship-Calhoun.
Maybe too much pride.
Too much pride?
Chapter 4:30. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? But he pretty much was boasting and had a lot of pride.
He's too caught up in his own self.
Good knowledge, right?
Read down just a couple more verses, I'm thinking 34, he did finally thank the Lord. He said, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion and everlasting dominion of the kingdom is from generation to generation. In 34.
You see what God did to him to bring him down. Turned him into a wild man, a wild beast looking creature.
Yeah. A lot of words.
He brought him down from his high place.
That's right. Stripped him of everything he had,
Lost all the knowledge he had, and he turned like a wild animal, basically.
pretty much.
And he lived in the fields with the beasts. Ate grass like a beast.
And thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make they eat grass as oxen, 7 times shall pass over thee until thou knowest the Most High God ruleth in the kingdom again, and brings it to naught to whomever he will, whomsoever he will.
33 talks about he was driven out from men, just like God told him was going to happen. He did eat grass as the oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird's claws. That's how long God kept him out there. He turned into a beast-looking creature and lost his mind. Because the Bible, then when he goes on down to where he confesses God, the Lord allowed after that season was over for him to come back in his right mind of reasoning. And he said, oh man, I really messed up. God took the kingdom from him that day.
Trying to see if it might have said somewhere along the lines of how long. They don't really say.
See 37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. He broke his pride after he did that. But he lost his kingdom because it was turned over to Belshazzar after that, which I believe was his son, right? Yeah, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out. So Belshazzar was actually his son. And you keep going on and on and on. Belshazzar has judgment on him because he tries to follow his father's footsteps. Judgment fell on him too.
My footnote is talking about how long. It said 4:23 7 times probably means 7 years, because the word times refers to years instead of 25. And because 7 days or months would not have been long enough for him, and I can't say his name, hair to grow to the length of eagle's feathers, as mentioned in verse 30.
So 7 years he wandered out in a wild, just a wild man, like an animal.
Didn't have no sense, the human sense at all in his mind anymore. He didn't have a mind anymore. And ate grass like the oxen.
Amazing thing, ain't it?
And after all that, his son didn't learn a thing.
Didn't learn a thing. But you stop and think about it, you look at the world and the condition it's in today. And you could probably say that if the same thing were witnessed among people today, to this magnitude that he's seen with the furnace, some people would still try to explain it away. Matter of fact, I did run across something where somebody did try to explain it away. They said, oh, they survived because they found a cool spot in the furnace.
I've heard that before too.
I looked at that and I said,
They did find a cool spot
would you?
in the presence of.
In the presence of God.
That's all the cool spot they were.
But they found a cool spot in there, it seemed like they were getting in that one cool spot, not walking.
Walking around.
Exactly.
It'd be like the song walking around when Jesus is walking around.
So say, man's ways and knowledge about makes sense. No matter which way you look at it.
Jesus was the shield.
That's right. All right, anybody else got anything else? We'll send your words up. Just a couple minutes over. All right, if not, everybody got something on this? Let's find somewhere to pray for service tonight. Amen.